The Book of Genesis Part 63. The Book of Genesis Part 63. James Gunn. Conditions for Blessing Scripture Readings, Chapter 32:1-2, 24-32, and 35:1-11. Together we have considered the faith and the fear of Jacob on the eve of meeting his brother Esau. We noticed that Jacob, who had a conflict with his brother Esau, and whom he hoped to overcome with strategy, was forced to meet him as a cripple, totally unable to defend himself. God alone was his refuge and strength in the face of enmity and anger. There is something more that happened on the night before the two brothers met. Jacob had an encounter with God. From God he asked a blessing which apparently he was not prepared to receive, and not in a condition to retain. Behind every circumstance in life, the Lord stands ready to bless. This fact is so obvious in the life that we are now studying. When Jacob's fears were the greatest and danger nearest, the Lord opened his eyes to see the host of God ready to defend him. One of the titles of God in both Testaments is the Lord of Hosts. This title pictures God as the defender of his beloved people. The psalmist knew him as such. The Lord of Hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our refuge, Psalms 46 verse 11. James also knew him as such. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, Creth, and the cries of them which have reaper are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth, the Lord of Hosts, James 5 verse 4. In the two passages for our scripture reading, we have recorded two epochs in the life of Jacob. Both of these raise the matter as to whether or not the believer is always ready for blessing. As far as God's blessing upon the patriarch is concerned, there is a definite similarity in the two passages, but in another sense there is a contrast. Jacob's name was changed to Israel, a prince with God, but the fact of its being repeated proves that the child of God is not always conditioned for blessing. Let us examine the two epochs. The first at Jabbok. Jacob's struggle with Esau was a moral conflict in which he sought to appease his wrath and to change his mind. This he attempted to do with bribery. A gift blindeth the eye. It could hardly be considered that a man who would stoop to deception would be spiritual. In his struggle with God, Jacob prevailed, but received more than the blessing he implored, a blessing he was in no state to appropriate and enjoy. He received the stroke of divine discipline that quelled his fighting spirit. One must learn that he cannot resist God. The marks of discipline remained with Jacob, but the blessing had to be repeated. It is notable that it is not always that which we consider a blessing that make a life beautiful, but a life is made lovely through discipline. This is so well illustrated in the life of the Apostle Paul, 2 Corinthians 12 verses 1-10. The second at El Bethel. On this occasion, without Jacob asking for it, the blessing was voluntarily given by the Lord. This probably resulted from a better spiritual condition in Jacob. The thrust of the sharp sickle at Jabbok produced the golden harvest at El Bethel. This improved state is reflected in Jacob's words and actions. Several features of this improvement may be detected. Remembrance. Jacob remembered the time God came unusually close to him. He recalled his first visit to Bethel and the vision of God he received there. It is ever well to compare the present state with that of the past. Frequently, such a comparison leads to an inventory of one-foot spirituality. Cleansing. It seems difficult to believe that a man who had been so near to God would allow idols in his home. Jacob, of course, was not alone in this. Solomon did likewise. Because of their love to their pagan wives, these two men lived in a compromise with idolatry. Here there is a decided change in Jacob. He cleanses his house and expels all rivals with God. In writing his exhortations to the Ephesians, Paul equates covetousness with idolatry, Ephesians 5 verse 5. In this connection, John, the last surviving apostle, says, "Little children, keep yourselves from idols," 1 John 5 verse 21. Obedience. There are times when obedience is obligatory, as in the case of Jonah. There are other times when obedience is voluntary, as in the case of Jacob here. He hasted and delayed not to keep God's commandments. Worship. On this occasion Jacob builds an altar, not a pillar. During his first visit to Bethel he raised a pillar, a witness that God had come down to him. Here he builds an altar, for all his heart now ascends up to God. He ascribes thanksgiving, praise, and honor upon that altar to the Lord. Such should be the attitude of the Christian now. Hebrews 13 verse 15. In such a condition of soul, Jacob is ready for the confirmation of the divine blessing. It is good when discipline yields the peaceable fruits of righteousness. The soul then can say with David, "Before I was afflicted I went astray, but now have I kept thy word." Psalms 119 verse 67.